The U.S. Supreme Court has announced that it will decide whether or not Donald Trump is a constitutionally ineligible insurrectionist disqualified from holding office. As centrists and moderate Democrats wring their hands about the consequences, Republicans publicly vow to remove President Biden from red state ballots in revenge, and Trump's attorney has suggested publicly that one of the Supreme Court justices owes Donald Trump for his seat. But before we unpack all that, if you end up liking this video and you want to support the channel, please be sure to hit the like, subscribe, and alert buttons before you go. I'd appreciate it. All right, friends, I have several clips to play. This may be a relatively long video, but I'll try to get through it as concisely as possible. I want to begin with a clip from Mehdi Hasan, who sadly, this is from his last episode on MSNBC, and then he announced that he was leaving the network shortly after they canceled his show. He is the best progressive commentator in mainstream media. He needs to be back somewhere on YouTube or somewhere pronto, like stat, because obviously this is a high stakes election. And yet he had something very eloquent to say, per usual, in about a minute and a half about the threat Donald Trump poses to democracy and the 14th Amendment.
Still, far too many Democrats don't seem to understand what's at stake. When Maine's Democratic Secretary of State removed Trump from her state's presidential primary ballot last month, she got attacked by other Democrats, including her state's independent Senator Angus King, who caucuses with the Dems. He said what a lot of centrist Democrats and independents have been saying in recent days. Quote, the decision as to whether or not Mr. Trump should again be considered for the presidency should rest with the people as expressed in free and fair elections. Sounds nice, but the fundamental problem with that argument is that the people did decide in 2020, 81 million to 74 million, and yet Trump didn't accept their decision. He tried to overturn that decision violently, and there is no reason to believe he will not do that again in November. That's why he shouldn't be on the ballot, and that's why the framers of Section 3 of the 14th Amendment came up with it in the first place, to deal with illiberal, anti-democratic threats like Trump. And yet, the same Republicans who obsess over the Second Amendment think the 14th Amendment is just optional. The same Supreme Court justices who obsess over the original intent of the framers are probably going to ignore that original intent next month and rule in favor of Donald Trump. And the same Donald Trump who incited an insurrection just 3 years ago could be either president again in a year's time or launch another insurrection. So it's safe to say America's crisis of democracy, sadly, is far from over.
Sad indeed. The other thing I would say that, he pointed out the flaw in Angus King's argument. I would say that there are two flaws in Angus King's argument. Yes, Donald Trump did not respect the result of a free and fair election in 2020, as Mehdi Hasan says, but also the fact that we do live, as Republicans like to tell us, in a constitutional republic, not simply a pure democracy. And the Constitution has always established parameters by which people may vote in their elected officials. For the President of the United States, you have to be 35 years old, you have to be a natural-born citizen, and according to Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, you can't have, having previously sworn an oath to defend the Constitution and support the Constitution, betrayed that oath by engaging in insurrection. You can't literally put in whoever you want to be president. There are certain parameters you have to meet. And that's something that centrists and moderate Democrats and certainly Republicans should be able to understand. Now, as I said, the Supreme Court has said this past Friday, that it will review the Colorado Supreme Court's unprecedented decision to kick Donald Trump off the ballot, and the Supreme Court has scheduled oral arguments for February 8th. Now, as a reminder, the current iteration of the United States Supreme Court is a 6-3 conservative supermajority, and 3 of the 6 conservative justices in question were nominated by Donald Trump. And with that in mind, I mean, you might think that, that sets the odds in Trump's favor, and I'm inclined to agree. And then you hear Alina Habba, Trump's personal attorney, say something as ominous as this.
I think it should be a slam dunk in the Supreme Court. I have faith in them. People like Kavanaugh, who the president fought for, who the president went through hell to get into place. He'll step up. Those people will step up, not because they're pro-Trump, but because they're pro-law, because they're pro-fairness. And the law on this is very clear.
Sure, not because they're pro-Trump, but I mean, Trump fought for him. Trump put him on the bench. I mean, they're pro-law. Shouldn't all the Supreme Court justices be pro-law? Don't you think? What about Clarence Thomas and Samuel Alito, who were not appointed by Trump? Aren't they pro-law? What is or Chief Justice Roberts? Isn't he Why Kavanaugh? Why somebody specifically that Trump appointed? Now, in response to this, Alina Habba received enormous pushback, but she defended her actions or defended those statements. She said that as I've said multiple times, the Constitution and law speak for itself, and I believe every justice will decide this clear-cut issue fairly. Left-wing media's attempt to intimidate justices who've been put through rigorous vetting due to who they were appointed by is ridiculous, and that's exactly why I addressed it. This is about the Constitution and due process, nothing else. Well, again, if that's true, you could have said it about Thomas, Alito, Chief Justice Roberts. You didn't have to point to a specific Trump appointee. This suggests that you're actually like calling in your chits that Trump owes you, or excuse me, that Kavanaugh, Amy Coney Barrett, and Neil Gorsuch owe your client, Donald Trump, something because he put them on the bench. CNN host Phil Mattingly responded, "If a Democrat said that about the Justice Department or Merrick Garland or fill in the blank here, there would be an absolute implosion. That's bonkers." "She's saying the quiet part out loud," replied panelist John Avalon. "She's saying that Brett Kavanaugh will step up and side with the president because he appointed him. That goes against every basic idea of law and independence of the judiciary." And other judicial scholars as well. "That's not how this works," tweeted National Security Attorney Bradley Moss. "Imagine for a second if a lawyer for Clinton, Obama, or Biden said this, it'd be a massive scandal at Fox." 100%. If a liberal or progressive attorney said anything like this about a liberal judge on behalf of a liberal ex-president, there's no question about it. Now, in response, or rather as a tangent about the Supreme Court composition with respect to Trump's cases, Clarence Thomas, whom Trump did not nominate, but whose wife is involved, Ginny Thomas, Clarence Thomas's wife, is a diehard Trump supporter and was implicated in various January 6th cases. She was in the outer perimeter, at the very least, of a scheme to help Trump overthrow the 2020 election. And Clarence Thomas received flack for being the lone dissent, not just recusing, or not just not recusing, but being the lone dissent on a landslide. It was 8-1, I believe, case about January 6th. He was the lone dissent, and it had to do in a vague way with his wife. And he caught a lot of flack for it because even other conservatives said that Clarence, this is a slam dunk, but he stayed on the case and decided against it. Then recently he recused himself from another January 6th case. He did the right thing. He recused himself because of his wife's perceived involvement. So here, Democratic Congressman Dan Goldman makes the case Clarence Thomas should do it here with respect to Donald Trump's 14th Amendment eligibility concerns, because January 6th is at the heart of the matter, which means Clarence Thomas's wife is tangentially involved as well.
If Clarence Thomas does not recuse and the court rules in Trump's favor in this case, what effect do you think that will have on the legitimacy of this ruling for the American people?
Well, as you've seen from public poll after public poll, the legitimacy of this Supreme Court is cratering. The credibility of the court is at an all-time low. And that's largely because of all of the ethics violations that have been uncovered about Justice Thomas in particular, but Justice Alito as well. And even in some cases, some of the other justices with questionable ethics adherence to the ethics rules. So the credibility is incredibly shot at this point. And the only way for the Supreme Court to restore credibility is to maintain its precedent, maintain its rules, and demonstrate that there is some sort of fealty to the rule of law and the canons of ethics. And if Justice Thomas does not recuse himself in this case, it will undermine dramatically more the credibility and legitimacy of this Supreme Court, which is already at an all-time low.
100%. There's less faith in the Supreme Court than there is in President Biden, than there is in Congress, than there is in House Republicans. They are exceptionally unpopular. And their popularity, or their acceptance by the people and the other branches, that is the only currency the Supreme Court has, because they don't control the purse and they don't control the sword, law enforcement and the military. So they need everybody to buy into their decisions, which means they need to come off as credible and sincere and non-biased as possible. It's going to be a huge challenge. Now, the other thing I said in the intro, so while all this is going on, and moderate and centrist Democrats and centrist moderate conservatives as well, like people who are just not, on either side of the spectrum, they're hand-wringing about this. You do have Republican elected officials just openly saying that they're going to kick Biden off the ballot. This clip from Ron DeSantis is particularly telling because, again, he just drops it. He just shows how bad faith he is. Listen very carefully.
This is just going to be a tit for tat, and it's just not going to end well. You could make a case, and I'm actually looking at this in Florida now. Could we make a credible case that Biden, because of the invasion of 8 million, and again, I don't think that's the right way to do it.
So DeSantis concedes that it's going to be a tit for tat and that it's not right, and he doesn't think it's the right way to do it, but he's going to do it anyway. He's looking into an excuse to kick President Biden off the Florida ballot because he doesn't think there's an actual predicate. That's pure brinkmanship. That's pure gamesmanship. We can't control that, right? Republicans are going to do that anyway. It's in their lifeblood. And quite frankly, as a matter of fact, as I've said, as part of the state of American politics, Democrats need a bit of that. They don't need all of it, but they need a bit of that in the sense of being willing to throw punches, metaphorically speaking, politically speaking, back at Republicans. But no, I mean, there's none of that Michelle Obama ethic. When they go low, we go high. He doesn't just disagree with the decision. He says, I think this is insane. Nobody should have this power, but damn it, I'm going to avail myself of it anyway, just to stick it to the libs. Okay. Again, incredibly irresponsible, incredibly dangerous, because at least those bringing the lawsuits who are Republicans are bringing these cases and these challenges far more often than not. At least they believe that there is a genuine predicate that Donald Trump engaged in insurrection and should be removed from the ballot. The last thing I want to play, probably not going to read the whole thing. This is a CNN interview with the Secretary of State of Missouri, who is another official saying that he's going to try to kick Joe Biden off the ballot, even though he doesn't think it should be done at all.
In other words, you think that when the Supreme Court takes this up, they are going to side with President Trump. Is that correct?
They are going to side against people being thrown off the ballot in this sort of manner. The brief that I will be filing with the United States Supreme Court is not going to say that President Trump was a bad person. It's not going to say that he's a good person. What it's going to say is that this extrajudicial means of removing people from the ballot is catastrophic to our country if it's allowed to continue. Because if Democrats can do it, you know that Republicans will do it. And if Republicans will do it, then Democrats will do it more.
To that point, Secretary, in order to remove President Biden from the ballot, according to your state constitution, you would need to go to court. What do you think would be your strongest argument?
No, not at all. Not at all.
Your state constitution actually states that the Secretary of State lacks authority to assess qualifications of a candidate to determine whether to place a candidate's name on a primary ballot. That's according to section 115.387 of your state constitution.
Sir, what I'm saying is, if the Supreme Court upholds the ruling out of Colorado, and what
which went to court to disqualify Donald Trump from the ballot. So you, according to your state constitution, would need to go to court.
Sir, let's just be clear. First of all, you've already said you're not an attorney and you don't know what happened in Colorado. I
know what happened in Colorado, sir. What I said was that I didn't read through all of the evidence specifically to be able to qualify whether there was hearsay or not. To get back to my question, you said that you would decide to remove Joe Biden from the ballot in your state. According to your state constitution, which I just read to you from, it says you need to go to court. I'm asking you what you think your strongest argument is.
And I continue to try to answer your questions, and you continue to try to tell me stuff that just isn't true.
That's not factual, sir. You made an accusation about me not knowing something. I'm trying to clarify it for you. You can choose to answer the question or just continue deflecting. What is the strongest argument you would make in court to remove Joe Biden from the ballot? Go.
That was brutal. I mean, that really was. That's why I'm saying this is how cockamamie the Republican tit for tat scheme is. They don't think they have an actual predicate here, right? They've talked about, well, Joe Biden has an open border. He doesn't have an open border. And if you think that his border efforts are insufficient, then you should increase funding and manpower, which President Biden has requested repeatedly, and he's not able to do himself because Congress grants that authorization. If you think the laws in effect are insufficient, then you should pass better laws, which is, again, something President Biden can't do. But they're scrambling. Well, Biden's under impeachment for Burisma. We heard the lieutenant governor of Texas suggest that, too. What about that? Well, that's not insurrection. But again, at the end of the day, Republicans and conservatives can and perhaps will try to take these cases to, they'll probably go judge shopping and try to find a favorable court, right? We can't stop them. If the idea is we can't take an action and we shouldn't take an action because if we do, Republicans will react in bad faith and try to engage in tit for tat just to even the score, then Democrats can't do anything, right? And that's not a viable proposition. We have to act in good faith. We have to do what we believe is right. And if Republicans are going to overreact and react in bad faith when they have power, we just have to do our best to try to, deal with that when it comes about. But we're not going to stop them from at least attempting. And that shouldn't be the calculus by which we make our decisions. So let me know what you think in the comments.